Chapter 27, The Malibu Hotel. Episode 6, Part 5. Blooper and Luigi were sitting at the table, in the middle of the parlor. "How'd you guys end up here?" Toadette asked. "It's a madness," Luigi whined. "I was so close to winning. I hate this game. I ruined my chances." Blooper rolled his eyes. "I haven't the slightest clue," he murmured. "We went through some room paradox and ended up finding a room we had just been in. Oh, and I got so hyped for nothing," Luigi continued to complain. "Don't worry," said Toadette. "I think we all know that Lakiitu's a cheater when it comes to games. Cards are not even a game for girls. It's for guys who like to gamble and lose money." "You don't suppose he's the mole?" Blooper said, folding his tentacles. "Because I'm almost 100% sure I know who the mole is." "Because it's you," Toadette realized. "Shut up and stop saying that." "That's quite absurd," Blooper replied, raising his voice. Luigi looked at the fireplace, lit and blazing. He wished that he was back home instead of having to spend a night in a stranger's house. "I know who the mole is," said Luigi quietly. "Luigi, Blooper could not be the mole, but maybe he could be. He's been switching my mind a lot, and if he turns out to be the mole, then he's been swimming under my radar a lot." Blooper, "The more people begin to suspect me, the more I smile to myself, especially when it's this far in the game. I'll move on to the end when people keep saying my name." "Luigi, the thing that's frightful is that I'm not sure whether Toadette and Lakiitu think that Luigi, is the mole or Blooper is the mole. Toadette, I was sure that the mole was a guy ever since Daisy left." "Well, I guess I was right." "Lakiitu, I don't care who the mole is right now, because I'm going back to the hotel, baby. Kisses to my girl." Blows a kiss to the camera. "Hello," Malibu said, entering the parlor. "I had just sent Lakiitu back home. It took him quite a while to accept the fact that he wasn't going to be able to sleep here overnight, much to his dismay. But you guys get to. We'll have so much fun together, won't we?" The three of them exchanged glances. "Here are your sleeping arrangements for tonight," he continued, putting down 7 playing cards on the table, face down. "We'll be playing one more card game, and I promise you that this will be the funnest one of them all. We'll be playing card gift exchange. One person flips one over and keeps it, the next person can steal or get a new one, and so on. Who wants to go first?" Nobody said anything, like usual. "Ladies first again," he instructed. "Toadette, choose a card and flip it over." Toadette grabbed the middle card from the row and turned it over. The conservatory. "A house of glass that holds much chance, you'll be a fish among the plants. But though the time goes quite a while, you'll have one there, eh?" "Luigi, now it's your turn to choose a card, or better yet, if you want to, you can steal Toadette's." Luigi shook his head and carefully selected one of the 6 remaining, and then flipped it to read the words. The basement. This house has 3 floors, but the basement is still hidden. Entering without permission is surely forbidden. However, you will feel forevermore closer to the dead than ever before. "No," Luigi gasped. "The basement sounds horrible enough, but with the word dead somewhere in the description? Please, somebody take this from me. I'll take your card, Blooper said in an agreeing tone. I'll try my best to survive in it. Really? He asked with surprise. Blooper nodded heavily, as he went over to take the card away from Luigi. Well, now that Blooper had stolen your sleeping reservation for the basement, Luigi, you must choose again. Luigi chose the last card in the row, and with crossed fingers, he turned it over. The kitchen. To a larder of gigantic size, a sight before your eyes. Though when I do advise to stay away from the flies, the stench is surely the worst surprise. Phew, that sounds much better, Luigi said in a thankful voice. I can always count on you, Blooper. No problem, Blooper replied, looking closely at the green plumber. Let me give out one more hint for the rooms for tonight, added the host. Things will become worse when your eyes are closed. McAliboo suddenly looked at the grandfather clock with a horrified glance. The funhouse is closing in 5 hours. He exclaimed. Hurry, hurry. Luigi, I'll bring you to your room first, since yours is the closest. Luigi made a face that looked as apprehensive as ever as McAliboo motioned him to follow behind, as the two of them exited the parlor and off to another room. I don't know what a conservatory is, Toadette admitted. Blooper looked at her with a sigh. It's a glass house, with all these plants in it, he explained. Basically, it's a miniature greenhouse. But don't you think that you'd rather have the basement? I only stole the basement from Luigi because I was playing around with his mind. That's mean, said Toadette. Luigi's a good person. It's called strategy, Blooper pointed out. You make people think other things which aren't true, when in fact, you're the one keeping the gigantic secret away from everyone else. McAliboo opened the large set of doors. Before them was the dining hall, hosting a long table that stretched from wall to wall, horizontally. Strangely enough, each seat had a plate and a set of silverware situated in front of it, totaling to a maximum of 25 possible diners. Gee, said Luigi. Is there going to be a party coming later on? Yes, said a delighted McAliboo. All of my beloved friends in this house will join me for a midnight snack, while you're locked up and away. We're entering the kitchen. Luigi stood still for a second, his face full of bewilderment, before continuing. Through the back of the large room was the kitchen, in where the two of them continued on past the dirty dishes and cooking appliances. Luigi held his nose as they approached the door in the very back, in where a source of smell was protruding from. Oh no, Luigi moaned. I smell meat. Rotten meat, corrected McAliboo, and pushed the door open. A chill was sent down the spines of the two of them as the cold freezer was exposed to the outside. Luigi coughed heavily with disbelief as he entered, taking off his cap and putting it around half of his face, in a futile attempt to block off the indescribable smell. This is the meat locker, said the host. All the meat here will eventually turn into pot roast and filet mignon, but right now, it's quite raw. Giant slabs of flesh hung from hooks attached to the ceiling, and with the ceiling being so low, they touched the ground, leaving strange, slimy meat ooze that covered almost the entirety of the floor. Luigi looked appalled, and looked even more appalled when he realized that McAliboo was already leaving him. I hope that I won't have to stay in here for the rest of the night, Luigi said, almost in a voice as if he was intending something. I'm sad to say that you won't be staying here for more than an hour, McAliboo explained to him, handing him a small watch timer. Once this starts to beep, your time would be up and you would be free to go. Now, the group was able to add 40,000 coins to the stake pot, and now, that money is still at risk, depending on what you decide to do. Luigi nodded. I'll decide to stay in this room for an hour, but I'll never know how it'll go, Luigi said to the host. The stench is already at the worst I can imagine, and if gets any worse, I'll refuse to handle it. You have all been assigned rooms for the night that you must all stay in for an appropriate time limit. If at any time you decide to leave this meat locker before the 1-hour timer is up, you can do so at your own will, but you would sacrifice 40,000 coins, money that could have otherwise been added to the team pot. Good luck. McAliboo exited the meat locker, grabbing the handle of the metal door and slamming it behind him, as Luigi eyed the timer carefully, time going by second by second. Luigi moaned with exhaustion at the clogged air. This is just a perfect, he said sarcastically, closing his eyes. Already looking forward to the worst possible, Blooper made his way down the wooden steps, as McAliboo followed right behind him. As the host closed the door, he flicked on the lights. Blooper shielded his eyes as lights from every corner came on, blinding him for a split second before he could regain his focus. Welcome to the basement, said McAliboo. I hope you have as fun of a night in here as I did. The calm player looked at the wall in front of him, at an extremely unfamiliar sight. Huge metal drawers were stacked on top of each other, each square having a handle and a small tag attached to the front of it. It was a morgue. Is this what I chose for myself? He asked, his voice entering into a tone of anxiousness. You must be placed into one of these morgue drawers, explained McAliboo, until 6 o'clock in the morning. The $40,000 that the group was able to add to the stake pot is still at risk, depending on what you decide to do during this game. If at any time you want to get out before 6 o'clock, yell the phrase morgue closing. If you do so, you would sacrifice the 40,000 coins that the players had earned, money that would have otherwise gone into the team pot. Once you're ready, tell us. Blooper stood still for a second, hesitating. I'm aware of the dangers of this, he said, after a second of thinking. There are many dangers to this, McAliboo pointed out. But remember that if you do not do your task, you would be the sole reason for the loss of money. It's your choice whether you want to do it or not. Blooper though again, but this time, in a more clever way. I'll do it, he finally said. I'll do anything to save the money of the team pot. Then take this. McAliboo handed him a plastic container. What could this be? Well, it just so happens that the bag is the same exact size of your body. Blooper unzipped the body bag and stepped inside, tentacle by tentacle, until he was completely standing in it. 2 producers came and stabbed coordinated holes into the heavy plastic, which would later serve as Blooper's only link to staying alive. Then, the 2 producers picked him up, pulled open the drawer labeled Blooper Inky, and placed him on the cold metal surface. Are you sure you want to do this? The player only nodded. McAliboo pulled the zipper over Blooper's head, sealing him within the body bag. The drawer was closed, plunging Blooper into a separate world of darkness. McAliboo led Toadette to the far side of the house, the closest to the outside as possible. A glass door stood in front of them, and when the host didn't go any further, Toadette went ahead to open it. I think you would find it better if I went inside first, McAliboo suggested, turning the handle and pulling the glass door open. It was the conservatory, a room of glass that served as a personal glass house and plant home for the many flower pots across the edge. A large cactus plant sat at the corner of the room next to a rake and a hoe, and in the center was a side table, with 2 garden armchairs surrounding it on both sides. And because the whole room was made out of glass, the moonlight was illuminating the area, serving as a secondary light source. But the out-of-the-ordinary object which caught Toadette's eye was the reptile, sitting right on the small table with its eyes open and roaming around. Toadette gasped and stood by the entrance. "Come on in," instructed McAliboo. "Hurry or she might get out." Toadette took the host's hand as she entered the conservatory. "Is that real?" she asked. "Of course she is," said McAliboo. "This is Priscilla. She's a crocodile. A little one. And she's going to be your roommate for the night. She's very happy to see you." Toadette moved towards the exit again, but McAliboo pulled her back gently. "Will she bite?" Toadette asked. "Crocodiles can bite," McAliboo said. "Of course they can, otherwise they couldn't eat. Any more questions?" Toadette just stood where she was, still grabbing onto the host's hand for comfort. She shook her head. "You must stay in this room until the ceiling stops leaking," he told her, pointing to a damp spot in the ceiling which had already left a small puddle on the floor. "The 40,000 coins that you were all able to add to the team pot are now at stake, and can either be thrown away or added to the team pot. Your job is to stay in this room for the appropriate time limit, but if at any time you decide to leave this room before your time is up, you may do so, but you would be sacrificing the 40,000 coins, away from the team pot and into the world of cowardice. I will be leaving you now." Toadette continued to stay still, eyeing the crocodile with fear. "Move away from the entrance so I can get out," McAliboo said with appreciation. Toadette stepped to the side, still looking at the crocodile. "I would be more focused on the leaking water than the alligator," McAliboo said. He hurriedly turned around to exit the conservatory, leaving Toadette by herself with the creature. At this time, Lackey 2 was already back at the hotel, in bed, sleeping peacefully and out of any harm for the night. "This is so gross," Luigi moaned, walking to a corner of the meat locker in where no meat or slimy substance was near. He crouched down and looked at the giant slab of meat hanging from the meat hook in front of him. "This isn't the worst," he said to himself. "I'm glad I was switched out of the basement." But as Luigi looked even closer, he began to see how nasty his room was in reality. The liquid on the floor was partially mixed with splashes of blood, and a pile of bones were laid on the other side of the meat locker. Luigi gagged suddenly at the increasing stench, falling forwards as his hands touched the wet ground. "Yuck," he moaned. "I don't think I can go on with this without throwing up." Time remaining, 50 minutes. Blooper shuffled in his body bag. He couldn't see anything around him, and when he held a tentacle up to his face to look at it, he realized that he was in a place of pure darkness. "This is getting very unnerving," he said to himself. "I'm all here, in the dark, trapped like a dead body." He kicked with force at the metal drawer at the end of his body, only feeling the tiniest of a budge as the shelf below him slid a centimeter back and forth. "Maybe sleeping is the only solution," he said thoughtfully, trying to shift his body as comfortably as he could within the tight space. "Though I find it hard if I'm not getting enough oxygen." 1:45 a.m. Toadette stood in the corner of the room, watching the little crocodile sit on the miniature table as it opened its mouth. "Don't be scared," she whispered to herself. The creature walked off the surface of the table and hit the floor, causing it to let out a strange groan and crawl forwards. Toadette shrieked and looked away at the wall. "Oh my God!" she said to herself, pressing her body into the corner of the conservatory even harder. The crocodile turned its head at her and stood still, from the other side of the room. Toadette was finally able to gather enough courage to turn around, and eyed the dripping water like the host told her to. It was dripping double the speed as it had been doing before. Drip. 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 Luigi held his nose with one hand and his hat over his mouth with the other. A flea from somewhere in the distance flew up to his eye and landed on his fingers, making the player jump up to his feet and swat it away. "Darn flea is contaminating the food," Luigi said with disgust. He brushed away some of the gooey liquid onto the wall behind him, scratching his fingers in the process as he slid his fingers across the rough, cement texture. The air got colder, and Luigi found himself leaning against the wall to support his shivering hands. Suddenly, Luigi turned around at an unusual noise, coming from somewhere behind the slabs of flesh and on the other side of the meat locker. The sound started to increase, and as Luigi began to recognize the vexation of the horrible noise, he covered his ears and mouth as the buzzing sound began to get closer, nearer to where he was. Hundreds of flies came into view, large portions of them attaching onto the hanging pieces of meat and feasting happily. But the rest that did not latch onto any of the rotting meat available in the meat locker went towards a different kind of meat in the room, right towards Luigi. "Ahhhhhh!" he yelled, closing his eyes and waving his hat out in front of him wildly, having no pity for the fleas which didn't stand a single chance against his swings. "I'm not even sure if it's safe to be in a situation like this," Blooper said, giving out a slightly exaggerated cough in his body bag. He kicked into the plastic below him for a second time, at the entrance of his morgue drawer. "Blooper, all of a sudden I began to think that my lungs were becoming smaller. And it was horrible, because who would like to have something bad and extraordinary happening to their body? Especially in such an unimaginable situation. I think I was just being rational when I started to feel like quitting." "Hey!" he called out. "I'm here in the drawer. I'm tired of waiting here, and I think I quit." Blooper waited for a reply. Nothing came back to him as an answer. "Is anyone out there?" he called out once again. Nobody came to help him, and as Blooper changed his mind, he lowered his shoulders and laid his head back on the metal bed. "If I quit now, everyone will start to suspect me," he realized. 2:30 a.m. The dripping in Toadette's room grew rapid, speeding up to a rate that transformed the drops of water into a little spray, as if from a hose. The ground was wooden, and as the water hit the floor, it spread outwards, and within the next few seconds, the entire floor was covered with a single layer of water. Toadette hopped on one foot and traveled to the middle of the room, where the two armchairs were present. The crocodile let out a deep murmur as it damped its feet in the coolness of the water, closing its eyes and bringing relief to Toadette. The water began to empty into the room like a pipe. "Please don't let the room flood," she prayed. She curled herself up into the safety of the armchair. The flies that were swarming around Luigi lessened to a smaller group, having either traveled to another piece of flesh in the meat locker or hit by Luigi's cap. The green cap, smeared with dead flies, was dropped to the ground by the disgusted player. "Ugh, another half hour," he moaned out loud, looking at his stopwatch. Watching the ground cautiously with wide eyes, he walked across the meat locker, passing a variety of rotten meat that the leftover flies quickly attached to. "Luigi, I was trying my best not to throw up, because just looking at a raw meat makes me feel extremely queasy. I was already thinking of throwing up by just entering the room, but I remembered it wasn't worth it to leave the room. Since I had it easiest over the others, I thought it best, and difficult, to keep my cool in such a small place. Time remaining, 25 minutes. Bored and losing the ability to stay awake, Blooper decided to sleep. Even in the place of a morgue, a place that only served comfort for the deceased, Blooper discovered that the inside of the morgue drawer served as the equivalent of a long cot with a plastic mattress. He woke up at the sound of a clang. "Hey!" he said out loud. He raised his head up, startled and alarmed at the sudden noise. He stayed in his position for a few more minutes before lying back down again.
"I guess this wasn't as bad as I thought it would have been,"
he whispered, before falling asleep for another hour. His mind explored his deepest dreams of imagination, revolving around his adventures of the past 3 weeks, and all the things he had done within them. 2:30 a.m. The crocodile, now floating, swam across the room. Toadette stood on her armchair as the animal swam in between the 2 pieces of furniture. The side table, which the crocodile had been initially placed in the beginning of the game, had so much buoyancy that it was also floating. The pots of flowers across the back of the conservatory were floating as well, spilling an unpleasant mix of leaves and soil on the surface of the water. "Toadette, I had no idea that the room was going to leak this much. If the whole room ends up being flooded, there would be nowhere to hide from the crocodile, and the crocodile is the scariest part of the room." Toadette gasped when she felt the water touch her shoes. The armchair was being submerged. When she finally thought everything could be at the worst, there was a twist to the end of her stay in McCaliboo's funhouse. The lights turned off. She screamed and fell into the water. Time remaining, 15 minutes. Luigi didn't bother to sit down, or hold his nose. His sticky hands were stretched out in front of him, in an attempt to wave at any flies that happened to pass his way. He tried his best in blocking away any thoughts of throwing up.
"This is as bad as the sewers in the Mushroom Kingdom,"
Luigi realized, having memorized the awful stench from the underground of his hometown. Though he didn't officially work as a plumber, he was always responsible for any sewage problems that erupted.
"Darn Bowser minions,"
he mumbled to himself. He stepped on a piece of flesh bone on the floor, making him gasp in surprise. All of a sudden, the lights were gone. All 3 players, Luigi, Blooper, and Toadette, were in complete darkness. Toadette let go off the armchair and discovered that she was swimming. She cried out for help, swimming up to the wall where she knew the door was at, and forced her hand underwater in search for the door. Her courage was disappearing.
"I can't swim,"
she cried, trying her best to stay above surface. The sound of the rushing water echoed back from the glass walls in a ringing vibration, and the crocodile, somewhere in the water, let out a growl. Toadette grabbed onto a flower pot in the dark to float on. When the pot broke in half, she fell to the bottom of the conservatory. Coughing, she rose back to the top and reached for the ceiling.
"You can quit any time you want,"
called a voice from the ceiling.
"Otherwise, you only have 5 minutes left. I want to get out now." "So you're quitting or you'll stay just a little more?"
the crocodile growled again.
"I quit,"
Toadette shouted.
I'm not doing this. Are you sure? Yes. Help me before the crocodile reaches me.
The tile above her opened, and a crew member dressed in a scuba diving suit reached down and picked the player up, away from the water and the clutches of the lurking crocodile. At that moment, the 40,000 coins were gone. Toadette was brought to the parlor of McAlliboo's funhouse, her clothes changed, a towel wrapped around her. McAlliboo looked disappointed.
Didn't enjoy my funhouse?
He asked her. Toadette shook her head.
Well, I told you before that if anyone quit, the 40,000 coins would be lost. Because you had left your room before the water stopped dripping, you lost the game for the group, as well as the money for this challenge. If you had stayed in the water for another 5 minutes, the water would have stopped. There was a crocodile in that room,
Toadette told him.
It was pitch black, and you couldn't see where the crocodile was. I'm definitely scared of wild animals anyway, so there was no way I could have lasted in that room any longer than I did. Even with no water in the room or with the lights on, the room still scared the crap out of me. And plus, 170,000 coins is fine with me, so I'm fine with what I did.
Team Pot. 170,000 coins.
You can sleep in that sleeping bag over there,
said McAlliboo, pointing to the corner of the parlor. Dry and out of harm for the night, she went to bed. Unaware that Toadette had left her room and forfeited the 40,000 coins, Blooper and Luigi continued to remain in their rooms for the night, with at least one of them in hopes of adding the non-existing money to the team pot.
It's scary,
whispered Luigi in a nervous voice, his body shivering not only from the increasing cold of the room, but from the fact that there was nowhere to go, or even see. The only source of light available was coming from his stopwatch. Time remaining, 5 minutes. Luigi, having becoming a braver individual, took a few steps forwards. His face ran smack into a hanging piece of meat. Luigi screamed. Blooper remained in his morgue drawer, asleep. He turned to his side and hit the metal beside him, waking himself up in the process. He let out an exasperated groan. Time remaining, 1 minute. Luigi knelt down for the majority of the end of his stay. He closed his eyes, something useless to do in a pitch-black room but something that made him feel more comfortable and relaxed. The stench, surprisingly, was disappearing slowly. Suddenly, the lights came on. Luigi stood with relief, a smile coming over his face. The door of the meat locker opened, and standing at the entrance of the horrid room was none other than McAlliboo. The watch in Luigi's hand began to beep.
"Thank you for enjoying my funhouse,"
said McAlliboo, his voice being converted back to his regular tone.
"I know that the meat locker wasn't too pleasant. But at least you were able to survive for an hour." "Yup, I tried my hardest,"
Luigi replied with a grin.
"Though the stench got so unbelievable at times that I felt like quitting. But I'm glad I didn't." "Follow me out this way,"
the host commanded, leading him out of the kitchen, past the empty dining table, and back to the safety of the parlor. Luigi entered the room and saw that the middle table was gone, and that 2 sleeping bags were positioned in the center of the floor. Toadette waved at him.
Hi,"
Luigi said.
"You're finished already?" "No, I quit,"
Toadette corrected.
"Sorry that I couldn't get you out of your room early and tell you that the 40,000 coins were already gone."
Luigi sighed.
"That's okay,"
he said.
Well, in honesty, I'm not sure how Blooper will react to this, but I'm okay with it. I was able to come over a fraction of my fears in the process. What was that? Spending an hour in a room full of dead animals,
Luigi told her.
Well, the meat locker. But it was a horrible. They let out a plethora of flies halfway through, and shut the lights off so all I could see was the light emitting from my watch. What was the conservatory like? I was told to stay until the dripping from the ceiling stopped,
Toadette explained.
But then the dripping got worse and turned into a large spray of water, and after a while the entire room was flooded. It was like an aquarium.
Luigi laughed.
Sorry,
Luigi said with a smile on his face.
That just sounds silly. Well, I thought I was going to drown,
Toadette told him.
And there was a crocodile in the water that kept on growling, and the lights shut off just like your room did, and... A crocodile!
Exclaimed Luigi.
Like a real crocodile? That's just too much. So this man above me yelled that it was okay to quit, so I did,
Toadette finished.
They pulled me up through the ceiling.
Luigi looked at the ground, then at Toadette.
Remember, during the picking of the rooms?
Luigi remembered.
When I was able to steal your card? I should have taken it from you. I mean, I didn't think the conservatory was going to be so bad, so I let you have it. Don't feel bad,
said Toadette.
How would you have known the conservatory was going to be the worst room out of all three?
Luigi looked at her with an astounded look, as if he was in a loss of words. Toadette looked at him, puzzled. Luigi then looked at his fingers with a face of amusement.
Hey! Do you have any hand sanitizer?
He asked quickly.
My hands are all sticky from the meat I touched in the meat locker. I mean, I remember seeing you have hand sanitizer in the hotel.
Toadette nodded with confusion and went to get her backpack. "4:00 a.m. Blooper coughed and woke up for the third time for the night. He felt more like a dead body than ever before. He shuffled around in his plastic container, trying to regain his comfort.
By soon you'll be gone,
he said drowsily.
You'll be out of here in no time. Just 2 more hours, I guess. Damn this.
Using his thinnest tentacle, he stretched open the hole which the 2 producers had poked into his bag at the beginning of his stay, and with another tentacle he split it wide open. He gasped with relief as his head made way out of the body bag and into the stillness of his morgue drawer. Half of his body was free.
This is unbelievable,
he muttered to himself. "5:00 a.m. The sun began to shine through the curtainless window of the parlor. Toadette was sound asleep, sleeping inside her sleeping bag with the dried towel in her hands. Luigi, however, sat up on his flat bed and didn't sleep at all. Something inside him, something emotionally affecting him, was preventing him from going to bed that morning. He looked at Toadette, then at the door of the parlor, then stared out the window until his eyes began to hurt. Blooper remained awake until his time was up. It was 6 o'clock in the morning, when all of a sudden there was a metal clang, the same sound Blooper had heard previously that had woken him up from his slumber. He heard the rattling of keys and a click, then felt his entire body move downwards as the entire shelf was pulled out. He shielded his eyes from the basement lights, and then looked up at the grinning face of Micaliboo.
About time,
Blooper said to him.
I was getting dehydrated. Did you enjoy the basement?
The host asked him.
Of course I did.
Blooper retorted.
And the best thing was, I didn't get a wink of sleep. My lungs were shrinking, and I felt as lifeless as ever.
He jumped off the morgue bed and zipped away the rest of the body bag around him.
It looks like you cheated,
said Micalliboo.
You were to remain in your body bag during the entire night, and not harm it in any way in the attempt of making things easier. I wasn't unaware,
Blooper said with a look of surprise. Micalliboo laughed.
Just kidding,
he finished.
Well, now you can go back to the parlor and sleep until 8.
Blooper followed the host up the basement stairs, and out of the funhouse. Micalliboo's funhouse, closed. Tired and worn out, Blooper opened the door of the parlor and saw a surprise. Both players were in the room. Toadette was sleeping. Luigi, wide awake, turned around to look at Blooper.
Hey!
said Luigi, getting up from the ground.
I'm glad you made it. I was a little worried you couldn't make it back.
Blooper just stood where he was, stunned.
This is what you guys have been doing this entire time,
Blooper said in a loud voice. Toadette woke up from her sleep and rubbed her eyes.
What time is it?
she asked.
It's 6 o'clock,
he replied. Luigi looked at the clock nervously.
I didn't get a wink of sleep,
exclaimed Blooper.
I was trapped in a morgue drawer, suffocating, dying, and having the most unpleasant night of my life, all in hopes of adding 40,000 coins to the team pot. Luigi
looked at Blooper.
Do you want to explain?
Blooper continued in a suggestive tone.
Well, I spent an hour in this yucky roomie,
Luigi explained to Blooper.
In the kitchen, where there was rotting meat. I had a timer for 1 hour, and once my time was done I was let out. Toadette stayed in a room with a crocodile and water, but she left before her time was up. She what?
Blooper shouted.
I'm sorry,
said Toadette.
There's no way I would spend the night in a room with a crocodile in it. You little cheat!
accused Blooper, pointing at Toadette.
I knew you were nothing but a spoiled brat. You just had to get out of your room and resort to a sleeping place of luxury. Calm down,
Luigi told him.
We're all tired. There's no use in getting mad. Put yourself in my situation,
Blooper demanded. Luigi raised his eyebrow.
I already am,
Luigi stated.
I haven't gotten a wink of sleep either. Do you know how torturous a meat locker is? It's also a place for dead people. I had to spend the night in that room as well. She just lost our money,
Blooper yelled. Luigi shook his head.
Good for you,
he replied.
We can still make a lot more if we want to in our next challenges. We have an entire episode left after this one. Wait,
Blooper realized.
Are you on her side or my side?
Luigi turned to look at Toadette, tired and frightened. Luigi looked back at Blooper, who was enraged, rude, and ready to blow.
I'm just protecting Toadette,
Luigi stated.
Stop attacking her just because she left her room. I would have left her room myself. We should all be mad at Lucky too for stealing the night in the hotel.
All of a sudden, Blooper relaxed. He sighed and looked at Toadette.
I think apologizing would be the best thing to do,
Luigi said with recommendation.
Fine,
said Blooper reluctantly.
I'm sorry. I'm mad because I went through all that crap for nothing in return, and I'm pissed off because of it. And I'm sorry too for making you do all that for nothing,
Toadette apologized. She turned over to go back to bed. Luigi stretched his arms, yawned, and then smiled at Blooper.
See?
Luigi remarked.
That all went smoothly.
Blooper glared at him, then took his own sleeping bag and lay down on the floor. Like Luigi, he remained awake. The players began to reflect on exactly what had happened during Micalibu's funhouse. Did the mole cause any of this? Was there really any deliberate sabotage? Or did the mole do nothing at all in this challenge, having felt the heat of suspicion already trailing behind their backs? Blooper, I don't see how Toadette couldn't have lasted in a room with a crocodile in it. There was a humongous amount of money at stake, and I'm sure that she knows how to swim, so she should have had no trouble in that room, even though it was pitch black. I would have lasted in her room with little or no trouble, showing that she's the mole. Luigi, I can never understand why Blooper gets so mad at these games. Maybe something's bothering him inside. But I just can't put my finger on what that could be. Toadette, if Blooper was the mole, it wouldn't make sense for him to stay in a morgue dryer for 6 hours. I think he was trying to show the others how much of a faithful player he was, when in reality, he's just trying to deflect suspicion off from himself by making it look as if he's supporting the team. Flashback of Blooper stealing Luigi's basement card. Toadette, something about Luigi, the way he talks, makes me think that he's hiding a secret. Blooper, my strategy with Luigi had worked fairly nicely, and continues to work out. Lakitu's and Toadette's involvement in it helps a lot. Luigi, I'm just very confused on what to think right now. Blooper can lose his temper very easily, which I thought was normal for a person to do after spending the night in a morgue dryer. Toadette chickened out of her room, something I would expect for a girl to do if she was ever faced with a crocodile. Lakitu is just plain lucky, or was it planned out for him to spend the night in the hotel? Overall, I was just more focused on how much money was still in the pot, and if I were to ever win that money, how happy I would be for myself and my loved ones. I'm been very lucky on the execution quizzes. Very lucky, in fact. The Mole is coming back to ABC on June 2nd. 12 contestants, 11 real players, 1 mole. And that person's going to sabotage the games and throw people off. Don't miss it. Lakitu, Toadette, Blooper, Luigi have all made it a far way. But one will be left behind, and miss out in the finale. The finale, in where there would be a winner, a loser, and the mole. Please review. End of chapter. Chapter 28, 3 Alive. Episode 6, Part 6. 3 tired players left the funhouse, unharmed, but exhausted and traumatized from their experiences. Micalibu approached the 3 of them, who were sitting down on the park bench. None of them were talking.
I'm now beginning to think that none of you enjoyed my funhouse,
Micalibu realized.
And I spent that entire night making everything proper. Since Toadette left her room, you win nothing for this challenge. So you can all blame her.
Blooper pretended to throw a rock at her.
But it does raise suspicion for Blooper and Luigi as well, continued Macaliboo. Did the mole feel the heat of suspicion trailing along him, and decided that this was the best game to redeem themselves? Take notice in how there was a bit of switching during the choosing of the hotel rooms.
Luigi looked away at the tombstone in the corner. Blooper looked hard at the host.
But never mind that,
the host said.
You're going to be in another challenge. It's called the flawed lie detector. Why is it the flawed lie detector?
Luigi wondered out loud. The host smiled.
Because the lie detector will be human, and humans make mistakes.
He looked at each of them carefully.
Lying has been an essential part of this game,
explained Macaliboo.
Ever since the first day, people had been lying to each other. The ability to lie, and detect lies in others has probably helped all of you in your strategies so far, up to this point. This next game will test your ability of lying. One by one, you'll enter the parlor and talk to Lucky 2. You will tell him about the rooms you spent in last night, along with all those tasty and minute details. 2 of you will lie to Lucky 2, and 1 will be telling the truth. If you can fool Lucky 2, 10,000 coins will be added to the pot. However, if Lucky 2 can figure out who's lying, and who's telling the truth, then no money would be added to the pot, and Lucky 2 would win an exemption.
Blooper, Lucky 2 just got to stay in a hotel last night, while the 3 of us spent the night in torture rooms. And now he's the one being offered an exemption? I don't really buy it. It's completely unfair that a player would receive such advantages, in just a single episode. Toadette, there are 2 possibilities that I thought of which would make Lucky 2 lose the money intentionally. 1, which terrifies me, is that Lucky 2 actually is the mole. The second being that he really wants the exemption so much that he'll lose money. Luigi, for the sake of the game, I want the money to be added to the pot, especially since we had just lost 40,000 coins in our last challenge, and I really don't want our losing streak to keep on consecutively.
I'll give you 5 minutes to decide which 2 people will be switching stories,
said Macaliboo. He left, most assumedly to get Lucky 2 from the hotel. Blooper pointed at Luigi and Toadette.
I'm only suggesting this when I say that, since you guys spent the most time together,
Blooper said with thought,
you should both switch stories. I think you guys should both switch stories because they're both about dead stuff,
Toadette told them.
I think that we should choose wisely,
Luigi said.
Which is?
Blooper asked him. Luigi shrugged.
How about this?
Said Toadette.
Who here is more comfortable with lying to Lucky 2? I am,
Luigi piped up.
I've lied hundreds of times. I can lie again.
Blooper looked at the ground.
I'm not sure,
Blooper admitted, scratching his head.
But I'll try to make it look as if I'm telling the whole truth. So I'll tell my crocodile story,
confirmed Toadette.
Luigi, you talk about a morgue, and Blooper, tell a believable meat locker story. But how am I supposed to talk about a meat locker if I've never seen one before in my life?
Blooper complained. He pointed at Luigi.
Why are you pointing at me?
Luigi said in defense.
I already chose for me to be a liar. I'm a good liar. I think Luigi should tell the truth,
Blooper said.
I'm just choosing for the best here. Do you agree, Toadette? If Luigi's okay with it,
she said, looking at Luigi.
Fine, I'll tell about the meat locker,
he agreed, with a hint of reluctance in his voice.
But then that means that you guys will have to switch. Is that fine?
Yup, Blooper concluded, and nobody spoke after that. Luigi, I really wanted to try and lie. I was thinking that if I tried and told the truth, it would be too obvious. I haven't really spoken to Lucky too much, so I'll see how he reacts to my talking. Toadette, I always go to a friend's house on weekends, and when my mom asks what I was doing, I lie and tell her that I'm just catching up on work. I can definitely use that at my advantage. Blooper, I definitely have a knack for lying, so I think we would win this game and keep a player from winning an exemption.
Your job is to figure out who is lying, and who is telling the truth,
McAliboo said to Lucky 2, who sat eagerly on the opposite side of the table.
You do that, you win an exemption, but will lose money for the team pot. I'm going straight for the exemption,
Lucky 2 said. McAliboo nodded and left the room. Toadette entered first.
Hi, Toadette,
Lucky 2 said. Toadette smiled and waved at him.
So, tell me about your night in McAliboo's funhouse.
Toadette rubbed her throat and smiled again.
I was brought second to my room,
Toadette explained.
I was brought down to the basement, in where McAliboo said I would have to spend the night until 6 o'clock in the morning. But there was a twist.
Lucky 2 laughed.
What was that?
He asked.
The whole wall was full of large, metal shelves, like a morgue. I saw that the drawer in front of me had my name on it, Toadette retoed. McAliboo told me that if I were to stay in that shelf until 6 o'clock, I would help add 40,000 coins to the pot. They brought over this large bag and told me to step inside. He poked holes in it, with little sharp tools, and zipped and closed, then carried me up onto the open platform. McAliboo asked me if I was okay with this, and I thought carefully and said yes. He then plunged me into the dark. Were you scared?
Asked Lucky 2.
Oh yeah,
said Toadette.
I couldn't see anything. It was difficult to breathe. I couldn't even move anywhere. I remember a while back,
Lucky 2 told her,
where you said out loud that you had claustrophobia. Why did you decide to do it then? Do the game,
said Toadette.
Sleep in a tight area,
Lucky 2 asked her. Toadette smiled.
I was told that this was for a lot of money,
she said quickly.
So knowing that this was the only time we could add a large amount of money into the team pot, I decided to suck it up and face my fears. But it was horrible. Did you get any sleep?
Said Lucky 2. Toadette shook her head.
I didn't get a wink of sleep,
she told him.
But it was completely dark, and you were lying down,
Lucky 2 reminded her. Toadette, Blooper told us that he didn't get a wink of sleep at all while he was in the morgue. Now that I think of it, it's almost impossible to not have fallen asleep in a dark area, especially if you were lying down in a flat surface.
You know, well,
said Toadette.
It's difficult to sleep if you can't breathe and if you're covered in plastic, so no time at all did I fall asleep. Not at all. It was impossible to, even if it was completely dark and I was lying completely down on my back.
Lakitu nodded heavily.
Thank you, Toadette,
he said. Toadette smiled once more. Lakitu, I decided to just listen to the person's voice and see if it sounded as if they were lying. Toadette was smiling a lot, which is unusual because she's always crying during challenges. But I guess she was just happy to see me, and I think she was telling the truth.
Hello, Luigi,
Lakitu greeted, as Luigi sat down. Luigi smiled at him.
So how was your night?
Lakitu asked.
Where did you spend the night in Mikalibu's funhouse? It was absolutely disgusting.
Luigi exclaimed.
Have you ever smelled rotten meat before? No. Not really,
Lakitu said with surprise.
Why? Was it your room? I had to spend an entire hour in a meat locker,
Luigi explained to him.
And it stunk. Literally. I mean, I didn't know it was going to be so bad. The air was freezing cold, and Mikalibu gave me a stopwatch. But still, I didn't know that flies were going to have to come out. Describe the flies,
Lakitu said to him. Luigi nodded.
They buzzed, like bees,
Luigi continued.
Out of nowhere in the meat locker, they came out and started to attach to all the hanging pieces of meat. But then the rest headed towards my body. And I waved my hat at them, trying to get them off. But I ended up running away to the other side, where I spent the remainder of my time. See, I even have proof that my story is true.
He pointed at his shaved head.
See? No hat.
Lakitu looked as puzzled as ever.
What would that prove?
He asked him.
When those flies swarmed me, I whacked them,
Luigi said.
They smeared all over my hat, so badly that I decided not to touch it anymore. Then there was all this ooze on the floor. Ooze?
Questioned Lakitu. Luigi nodded.
Yes, ooze on the floor from the slabs of flesh in the room,
Luigi told him. Lakitu looked under the table, at Luigi's shoes. There was no sign of any wetness, or damage anywhere on Luigi's feet.
Did you just stay in one area, or did you walk around the entire time?
Lakitu asked.
Like I said, I moved when something bad happened,
said Luigi.
I found a place where there was no ooze, and crouched down and covered my face with my dirty hands. Oh, and for the last 5 minutes, the lights shut off. Boom. Nothing to see. And you stayed in the meat locker until 5 minutes went by,
Lakitu stated, nodding his head. Luigi nodded.
In the dark?
Lakitu asked.
I'm sure that you were shivering with terror, because everyone knows you're afraid of the dark.
Luigi, maybe it looked like I'm lying to Lakitu. But in fact, I was just trying my best to look cool, and sound as casual as ever. I didn't know why I was picked to tell the truth in the first place.
I was,
said Luigi.
Did I mention that the room was cold? It was like a freezer, not too cold, but cold enough to keep meat fresh. In this case, the meat was not, unfortunately. After an hour Mikalibu opened the door, and I was let out.
Lakitu nodded again.
Thank you, Luigi,
Lakitu concluded. Luigi got up, stretched, and left the parlor. Lakitu, I couldn't tell whether Luigi was lying or telling the truth. He said something about ooze on the ground, and when I looked under the table, I didn't see any ooze. I really think that Luigi was trying to make it look like a lie, but in fact, it was the truth. Or maybe he was lying. Blooper entered the parlor last and sat down at the table.
"Hello, Blooper,"
Lucky 2 said in a greeting voice.
"Glad to see you." "Glad to see you too,"
Blooper replied.
"So what exactly did you do in Micalibu's funhouse?"
Lucky 2 asked. Blooper cleared his voice.
"I was brought to a room,"
he said,
"which was made out of all glass. I could see the moon outside, and it was like a little greenhouse. I noticed that the ceiling was dripping and so I asked Micalibu about it. He said, 'Oh, don't worry about it. I would be more worried about that.' I turn around, and before my very eyes I see a crocodile, around 5 feet long. It's on a table and it growled and made strange, very strange gurgles, and I knew that it was not going to be a fun night." "So how long did you have to spend in the room?"
asked Lucky 2.
"Until the ceiling stopped leaking,"
Blooper explained.
"I tried to get the host into telling me how long exactly, but he didn't tell me, and so he left me alone with the crocodile." "This room sounds worse than the other two,"
Lucky 2 said.
"Go on. What happened next?" "I sat in the corner, very frightened of the crocodile. And before I knew it, the room was flooding. I tried to swim, but I just couldn't." "Hold it,"
Lucky 2 said with realization.
"You swim. You're a sea scavenger, and explore the sea and do everything underwater. And you're telling me that you couldn't swim?"
Blooper opened his mouth as if he was going to say something, but he didn't.
"I'm not yet done telling about what I did last night,"
Blooper said, clearing his voice again.
"I knew how to swim, yes. I'm an expert at swimming. I was just faced with a crocodile, and that changes everything. It scared me a lot, and once you're scared, you can't think at all. I mean, even though I felt right at home in the water, I was so focused on the crocodile that I couldn't even do my favorite activity."
Lucky 2 just stared at him.
"So like I was saying," continued Blooper, "the entire room was flooded. Then the lights turned off, and the place was dark. I was so scared of the crocodile that I quit. I had enough of the crocodile, and with it, yeah, it's growling."
Blooper tried his best to imitate the growl of a crocodile.
"You've never faced anything scarier than a crocodile before?"
Lucky 2 asked.
"You've spent years in the ocean."
Blooper didn't say anything.
"You see, I was just really stressed out from the entire game,"
Blooper answered.
"And how much money did you lose?" "We lost 40,000 coins. But like I said, I was so stressed out. I could barely pay attention afterwards, and I did feel a little faint and lightheaded, from the experience I had just gone through." "Thank you, Blooper,"
said Lucky 2. Blooper nodded and left the room silently. Blooper, I wasn't sure whether I had fooled Lucky 2 or not into believing my story. He kept on pointing out things that contradicted what I was saying, and had many questions that regarded how I acted. I tried remembering everything about the conservatory and tried to say it out loud, but when the words came out of my mouth, I began to stutter. Lucky 2, Blooper didn't trick me at all. No way was he telling the truth. And the good thing is this guarantees me closer to an exemption. All three of the interrogated players were back in the parlor, sitting on the couch. Two of them were nervous, afraid at the possibility that Lucky 2 would earn himself a free pass to the next round. One of them, however, sat back coolly.
Have you made your final answer?
Macalibou confirmed with Lakitu. Lakitu nodded.
I have made my final answer,
Lakitu said.
Let me start with Luigi. Luigi, you talked about spending an hour in the meat locker. But it was way too vague. Also, you talked about ooze on the floor. I looked under the table while you were talking and realized that there was no dampness or wet spots on your shoes, which there should have been.
Luigi stood still.
Toadette, you talked about spending the night in a morgue shelf,
said Lakitu.
Even though you do have some claustrophobia, I think that you were pressured enough with the money, pressured enough to make you do it. But I still can't believe how you weren't able to get a wink of sleep in there.
Toadette nodded.
Blooper, blooper,
Lakitu said, sighing.
I find it hard to believe that you would be scared of a room that was flooded. You've spent your entire life underwater, and you've also faced a lot of other wild creatures that don't even compare to the mildness of a crocodile. And the way you talked about your room sounded as if you were making things up, so if you hadn't have guessed already, I believe you were lying. So what's your final answer?
Macalibou asked Lakitu.
That Toadette told the truth and Luigi and Blooper switched stories. Okay, lie detectors,
said Macalibou.
Thank you for your analysis. We'll start with Blooper. Blooper, what did you do? I lied,
Blooper said.
Toadette. I also lied,
Toadette said, smiling.
Damn!
Exclaimed Lakitu.
Are you serious? You got me. You got me good. I had a feeling there was something wrong when you kept on smiling.
Lakitu hung his head.
And I was actually telling the truth,
Luigi added.
So I guess that means no exemption,
realized Lakitu.
That's correct,
Macalibou declared.
And because you failed to get the final exemption for this entire game, not only will you never hear the word exemption ever spoken again, but 10,000 coins will be added to the team pot. Well done.
Team pot. 180,000 coins.
The final execution ceremony will be happening tonight,
Macalibou reminded them.
From victory comes a loss. Tonight, someone will be leaving us.
Lakitu, I had a gut feeling that I wasn't going to win the exemption. I mean, it was just impossible to act like a lie detector. Toadette, I knew that Lakitu wanted the final exemption so badly, so when he didn't get it, I did feel kinda bad for him. Luigi, oh my god, why am I still here? I should have taken Daisy's place on her execution. Just thinking about it makes me miserable. Blooper, this game has been so intense so far. I'm beginning to feel as if I'm been having a free pass all along through all the episodes. All 4 players took their penultimate quiz simultaneously. As important as answering the questions were, time was also an issue. What if everyone knew who the mole was? What if everyone tied in with the same amount of correct answers? As unlikely as it sounds, it could still happen at this point in the game. Toadette stared heavily at the screen, at the first question. 1. Did the mole stay indoors or outdoors for their first episode 6 challenge? Indoors. Outdoors. Toadette, there was a lot of controversy on whether Luigi wanted to be indoors or outdoors, and it had nothing to do with the weather. I think that Luigi feels uncomfortable with Blooper. Maybe he knows that Blooper is the mole. The second possibility is that maybe Luigi knows that Blooper is suspecting him as the mole, and therefore wants to stay away from him. Flashback Luigi:
I wouldn't really mind switching partners.
Flashback Lakitu:
What's the point? You're just trying to avoid Blooper, and everyone can see that.
Lakitu looked hard at the choices for question 2. 2. What did the mole do during the Koopa spelling game? Participated, caught a Koopa. Participated, didn't do anything. Did not participate. Lakitu: right after Blooper had given me the jacket, the Mecha Koopas froze in their place. I'm sure that there was something strange with the jacket. Why would you randomly give someone a jacket in the middle of a game? I just found that to be very odd. Flashback Blooper:
Wear this jacket. I think you'll be cold.
Gives Lakitu a jacket. Blooper: read the choices for the third question. 3. In the Elsum Art Gallery, did the mole successfully fool the critic? Yes. No. The mole did not play the art challenge. Blooper: Luigi and Toadette did the exhibit game. They lost the game, which I find very unbelievable. They both claimed to be good at art, and if they were so good at art, I found it suspicious how they didn't win their challenge at all. Luigi took his mouse and chose his answer for question 3, his fingers moving as rapidly as they could. Luigi: Toadette wanted to cut up the antennae of the television and add them to the scraps inside the TV. It made a larger mess, but she thought she was being artistic. In my opinion, I think she was just trying to complicate everything up. Flashback Toadette:
We can use these for something.
Grabs the antennae. 4. Did the mole succeed in their
second part challenge?
Yes. No. Lakitu: I just realized that while Blooper was determining which one of the art pieces Toadette and Luigi had created, he did everything to persuade me that theirs wasn't the correct one. When we did get up to the television, Blooper pointed out all these things that proved it wasn't their artwork. But in the end, it did turn out to be theirs. It seemed to be more than just bad luck to me. 5. Did the mole peek at the wall in room 401 while their blindfold was on? Yes. No. The mole wasn't brought to room 401. Toadette: in room 401, the Scrabble board had the phrase,
"The mole is male,"
which was extremely blatant. I think they decided to put that phrase up because I was the only girl left, and because they knew it wouldn't help me. The only other person that I'm sure peeked at the board besides me was Luigi, so if he's the mole, then that wouldn't help him either. 6. What did the mole eat for dinner the night before Micalibu's Funhouse? Meatballs and spaghetti. Waldorf salad. Cheeseburger. Shrimp scampi pasta. Luigi, Lakitu drank so much wine that dinner. Even more coincidentally, that gave him an extra life during Mikalibu's funhouse, because as Mikalibu said, the person who drank the most wine the night before got an extra life in the card games. I found it unfair, because every time I drink a lot of wine, my face gets all flushed and I begin to feel queasy all over. So Lakitu easily was able to stay out of Mikalibu's funhouse because of that. 7. Which card game did the mole get out on? Spoons. Blackjack. Poker. The mole survived all 3 games. 8. What was the total sum value of all the cards that the mole flipped over during the high card game? Aces equal 1, Jack 11, Queen 12, King 13? -7. -11. -13. -23. Blooper, I decided to make something special, in terms involving Luigi. We had bonded a lot, especially when I formed that little coalition with him. But now he's been looking at me like a suspect, and I'm doing the same with him. But overall, we have some sort of trust that is still hanging by a thread, and whether that trust would last long, well, we'll be experimenting it if we both survive this execution. Toadette, if I were to trust someone in this game, I would trust Lakitu. But him not being present while Mikalibu's funhouse was going on gives Lakitu a huge disadvantage on this quiz, and I told him that. He said he already knows who the mole is, so he doesn't have to worry. Flashback. Lakitu puts down cards. I guess I win. 9. Where did the mole spend the night during Mikalibu's funhouse? The kitchen. The basement. The conservatory. In the hotel. Blooper, when Luigi picked his room for the night in Mikalibu's funhouse, it was originally the basement. But Luigi made such a big fuss about it that I gave in and took his card. Luigi ended up getting the kitchen, which in my opinion was the easiest out of all 3. I think he knew secretly that the kitchen, though as bad as it was not the worst room, and that the basement and conservatory were. Luigi stayed in the kitchen, possibly in the attempt to deflect suspicion off from himself. Toadette, I was talking with Luigi while we were sleeping in the parlor, and I brought up the possibility that Luigi knew which room was which. Flashback. Toadette, how would you have known the conservatory was going to be the worst room out of all 3? Toadette, all of a sudden, Luigi freezes, as if I found something out. I knew that I had discovered something, seeing the strange way he acted. 10. How long did the mole have to stay in Mikalibu's funhouse? 45 minutes. 1 hour. 5 hours. The mole didn't stay in McAlibu's funhouse. Blooper, Toadette chickened out of her room before her 45 minutes were up in the funhouse. I think she was scared, but that's no excuse for leaving your room when you are clearly instructed to stay inside of it until your time is up. It was obviously sabotage. 11. At exactly 3 o'clock a.m. during McAlibu's funhouse, where was the mole? In the parlor. In a morgue drawer. In the hotel. Flashback of Luigi in the parlor, wide awake. 12. What did the mole do during the flawed lie detector challenge? Lie. Tell the truth. Play the lie detector. Lucky 2. During the lie detector challenge, Blooper lied so obviously. It was almost as if he wanted me to get the exemption, and in result, lose money for the team pot. 13. During the morning videotaping, who was the mole interviewing? Luigi. Toadette. Lucky 2. Blooper. Blooper, if Luigi had taken my place during the lie detector game, he would have told the story about the conservatory and made it sound more believable. But because he chose to tell his story about the kitchen instead, we nearly lost the game. 14. What is the mole's occupation? Actor. Air traffic controller. Gardener/florist. Hair salon owner. Emergency nurse. Plumber. Sea scavenger. Tennis trainer. Lucky 2. I've been looking for a lot of clues lately in the games. I remembered how ZB June, the name of the tranquilizers in our past game, looked like Toadette's birthday June 26th. I remember how that letter we had gotten at breakfast was signed mysteriously. The mole, the 12th and the 13th, and coincidentally the 12th and 13th letters of the alphabet are L and M. And the book from the Art Museum, Cheerleading Volume 6.02, was written by a strange named author named Ed Esquida, which if combined, would spell out the word squid. 10. Who is the mole? Luigi. Lucky 2. Toadette. Blooper. Toadette, I've been going for Blooper as the mole on the past 2 quizzes. Peach told me on the night of her execution that she didn't choose Blooper at all, so I'm sure he's the mole. Blooper, I can't guarantee that Luigi isn't the mole. It's true that I didn't vote for him last quiz, but I might have to change my mind this time around. He's been slowly climbing up my suspects list since the last execution. Lucky 2, I've suspected Toadette from the beginning. I don't know why, she's always there to talk to, and that's made me think she's the mole. Luigi, the more I begin to consider that Blooper is the mole, the more I think that it might actually be true. So for this quiz, we're both going to go with our gut instincts. It was just about to narrow down to the final three. The players gave their last farewell. Toadette, if I get executed tonight, I'll remember that it's all just a game and that it's fine if I lose. Lakitu, I've been lucky enough to even make it this far. I've beaten a lot of other players up to this stage of the game. Blooper, being executed might actually bring some relief to me, from all the stress that has built up in the past couple of days. Luigi, I'm almost positive that I'm being executed tonight. This was the hardest quiz we had taken so far. I ended up guessing on so many questions that I'm almost unsure who I had voted for. Inside the little town chapel, there were 4 chairs and a television. Each player walked down the aisle and sat down on a chair, then looked forward at the blazing monitor that shined neon lighting across the inside of the building. The infamous thumbprint stared them back, and they all shivered. Macaliboo walked over to his chair and sat down.
"Welcome to your final execution ceremony," he said, talking in a voice that spoke out to each of the players, almost individually. "I know it's been almost 3 weeks together ever since we had all met up on that cliff top, in where you, Luigi, sabotaged the game, in where you, Blooper, lost your watch, in where you, Toadette, were afraid to jump, and in where you, Lakitu, volunteered bravely to go first. Early on in the game, you had all been nervous about being executed on the first few rounds, but with truth do I say that you've all lasted longer than the others. So please commend yourselves, and if you are eliminated tonight, may you feel no shame in leaving, but rather pride for making it this far in the game."
Lakitu looked down at the wooden floor, proud. Toadette smiled and nodded to herself. Luigi stayed still, with a look of fear displayed on his face. Blooper stuck out his tentacle and shook each of the others' hands. Once he was finished, he sat back down, his face content and relaxed.
"Are you ready, Luigi?"
"I think," said the nervous plumber, looking as frightened and unsure as ever.
"Are you ready, Blooper?"
"I am," said the sea scavenger, his face ambiguous and his tentacles down.
"Are you ready, Toadette?"
"Yes," said the emergency nurse, nodding and gripping her shoulder tightly.
"Are you ready, Lakitu?"
"I am ready," the air traffic controller said. He swallowed deeply, then looked up.
"Then let's begin your 6th and final execution," said the host. "Tonight, I'll be entering your names by age. Youngest to oldest."
He looked at all of them.
Toadette.
Being small and underrated by her fellow teammates, Toadette had proven them wrong by making it farther than any other girl in the game. Watching her name being typed into the computer, she threw away the pessimism in her mind and sat with hope, praying silently that the screen would turn green. Toadette. She gripped her shoulder tightly. Green. Toadette relaxed and let go off her shoulder.
"Luigi,"
said the host. The younger of the Mario pair, Luigi was always ridiculed by his lack of experience and direction, yet managed to somehow stay in the game longer than anyone had ever expected him to. Luigi closed his eyes. He felt beads of sweat appear on the side of his head, listening as McAliboo tapped away on the keyboard, entering in his name. Luigi. He opened his eyes again unwillingly, fear dreading inside of him. Green. His face displayed the maximum of surprise. He sat back down with a deep sigh, wide-eyed and relieved as well. There were 2 left.
Lucky 2,
the host said. Having been the most dynamic player of the group, Lucky 2 had slowly gained trust throughout the episodes from his peers, from going from being one of the most suspicious players to one of the most enjoyable players of the game. Lucky 2 looked up at the screen, the lump in his throat getting larger as the host typed his name in. Lakitu. Red. Lakitu leaned his head back with a grin, then got up to his feet. As Blooper sighed heavily, he watched with a sorry heart as Lakitu went over to his bag and picked it up. With a wave, he followed the host out of the chapel and out onto the street. The 3 surviving players stood still, motionless, not saying a word.
I had a blast,
said Lakitu to McAliboo.
It was already worth it since the start. I'm sad to leave, because the whole game was just fun ever since the beginning.
McAliboo nodded.
Were you surprised that you were executed? Yes, and no,
Lakitu admitted.
He tricked me good, and I made the wrong mistake that I shouldn't have made. But you know, it was entirely my fault. I knew that it was wrong to go with most of my gut instincts. I'm in shock,
Luigi said with surprise, looking out the door and breathing heavily.
I truly expected to be the one to go.
He sighed again, this time with sadness about Lakitu's disappearance.
I feel horrible that Lakitu was eliminated,
Blooper said, his face showing gloom.
For some reason, I feel partially responsible for his execution, and the cause for him to leave tonight. Lakitu brought so much energy to the group at this stage,
Toadette remembered.
Even this far, he made us remember that this is all a game, and that it's all okay whether you win or not.
Flashback of Lakitu waving in the helicopter during the hostage rescue, yelling enthusiastically at the others below.
And I feel so bad for preventing him from winning that exemption,
Luigi said in an unhappy tone of voice.
If he had gotten it, he would have been able to stay. But imagining which one of us would have gone instead of him.
Luigi shook his head.
I really will miss Lakitu, now that he's gone from the game,
Blooper said truthfully.
I didn't want him to be eliminated, so I'm really sad to see him not moving on to the finale.
Then, he half smiled.
He was always the one being funny, but at the same time, sabotaging the games,
Blooper said.
During the selling challenge, we had to sell these objects and Lakitu was doing such a horrible, hilarious job at it.
Flashback Lakitu,
shoes for 50 coins. They're size 6, buy them now. Fits everybody. He kept on pairing up with me,
Toadette realized.
I'm not sure whether he was doing that on purpose, and I was hoping that he didn't have a crush on me or anything.
The other 2 burst into laughter.
But I remembered how I just hated his character during the beginning of the game,
Toadette continued.
But as the game went on, he began showing his true side, and that just made us feel happy.
Flashback Lucky 2.
I know it was hideous. But that's how the game goes, and some things are just unfair and cruel on this show. So don't blame yourself at all. It's not your fault.
Dominique, Toadette said, finding tears in her eyes. Luigi smiled, feeling even more emotionally touched himself.
I guess it is a bit of an upside,
Luigi said with thought,
because it just so happened that Lucky 2 was not one of my suspects, and so with him gone, I can narrow it down even more. But I feel terrible for saying such a thing. I guess we all feel bad for Lucky 2 in some way,
Blooper concluded.
So I guess we'll all be missing him as we move on, in some way or another. I just want to congratulate you for making it this far into the game,
McAliboo told Lucky 2, as he entered the infamous taxi with the symbol of the two snakes wrapped around the pole.
Do you feel proud in yourself? Of course I do.
Lucky 2 said.
And I think Dominique has been especially proud of me, so she'll be happy no matter what. I don't need the money, I just wanted it to be added to my life. Nothing big. As long as nothing will be taken away from my life, I'm as content as ever, because right now, I have everything I've ever needed, a home, a wife, a family, and now, a whole bunch of closer connections to 8 other people.
He grinned and looked down at the ground.
Well, you did indeed play the game at your best,
McAliboo commented.
And the final 3 will indeed be missing you and wishing you luck.
Lucky 2, as soon as I get home, I'll be putting advertisements all over the local papers that say,
"Lie detector and sales representative available, no exemptions required." And good luck to them too,
Lucky 2 said, looking back at the chapel.
Good luck, Toadette, Luigi. Blooper.
And with that, Lucky 2 entered the taxi. He did a salute to the host as the vehicle drove away, and then looked back at the chapel. As Lucky 2 left the game, there were 3 left. A winner, a loser, and the mole. On the next episode, 3 players remain. One will try to sabotage the most. Luigi, why would I do that? There's no reason I would do that on purpose. One will discover the consequences. Blooper, maybe I shouldn't have done that in the first place. I know that it was wrong. One will end the games. McAliboo, in this folder is the mole's full profile, including the mole's background information, episode diary entries, and various acts of sabotage. Toadette, oh my god. McAliboo, it's up to you. Will you take it? And one will know the identity of the mole. The train stops at the railway station. McAliboo, may the winner's door please open. One of the 3 doors of the train slides open, and a figure steps out. And I finished this concluding chapter right before my tonsillectomy. The game really is coming to an end. Temptation and truth lies in the next episode. Someone would leave disappointed. Someone would go home with the money. And someone would go home, with the satisfaction of a job well done. And please review. I'd like to praise Firekai for being a reviewer for every one of my chapters. As a gift, whenever you want me to, I'll tell you who the mole is. Stay tuned for the finale, everyone. The truth is soon to be revealed. End of chapter. Chapter 29, Personal Questions. Episode 7. Toadette. Blooper. Luigi. 3 alive. Lakitu left in the final execution ceremony of the game. He was so close to the finale, but his gut instincts were wrong. Now returning back to a happy home, he ended the game well played, well lightened, and well liked. With only 3 remaining, trust is diminished and discovery is key. Only 2 have the continuous stress building up on them. But one of them has been acting this entire time. These 3 final players have nowhere to go after this episode, because they will all take their place in the end. One would be the loser. 1, the winner of the entire game. And 1 to be finally unmasked as the mole. Blooper. Surname, Inky. Birthday, November 4th. Occupation, sea scavenger. Toadette. Surname, Retoad. Birthday, June 26th. Occupation, emergency nurse. Luigi. Surname, Mario. Birthday, January 18th. Occupation, plumber. Luigi, have I made it all the way to this point of the game by myself? Not at all, but I can't help but take credit for everything I've done. Final episode. Final chance to show what I'm made of. Let's see what I'll do. Toadette, to make it to the final 3 is great. This is the last episode. OD, so after this, the game is finished. I think I'm finna ready to go home, no matter what the results will be. Blooper, I've kept an eye on what I've been doing throughout this entire game. And so far, I feel as if I hadn't accomplished enough. Even with that fact that I'm in the final 3, I feel as if I have one more obstacle to get by.
Greetings, Dr. Retoad, Luigi said in a proper voice, pointing the video camera at Toadette. Ready to help the world? Yes, she's going to make a great doctor one day, Blooper said. But I'll be the most famous sea explorer of all time. Digging up the Titanic, discovering Nessie. Shall I go on? And Luigi, you're not just a plumber, Toadette said. You're more than that.
Luigi looked down at the ground.
Ahem, let's continue, said Luigi. Who do you think the mole is?
Toadette pointed to her left, at Blooper. As the camera went to Blooper, he pointed directly back to his right, at Toadette.
Aren't you forgetting someone?
Both Blooper and Toadette pointed at the camera, at Luigi. Luigi, we've bonded so close to each other. It's not what I came here for, to make friends. I came here to do my job, which did not include having genuine friendships. Toadette, I think the mole at this point is glad to have been the mole, because they got to stay the entire game and experience so much. Blooper, yeah, I guess I have been enjoying myself a lot, even though I don't show it at all. It's been fun and most definitely worth it up to now. 1. Are you the mole? Say yes and explain how. Toadette, I am the mole. I do my job with a quick wit, a clear mind, and a short, focused body. Blooper, I'm the mole, and I can say that because I tend to be able to hide some information about myself that the others will never know about. Luigi, yes, I'm the mole. Mostly on the fact that I act so clueless during the games and quizzes, and still manage to stay in the game. 2. Are you the mole? Say no and explain why. Toadette, I'm not the mole, pretty much because then that would mean that I can't win the money, and my goal is to win the money. I've already completed my first goal, which was to discover how far I can go. Since I did that, I'm now on to goal number 2. Blooper, I'm not the mole. To be the mole, you have to deceive people. As far as I'm concerned, I haven't been deceiving anybody up to this point. And everything's just so contrary, so I can't really prove if I'm the mole or not, even though I know I'm not the mole. Luigi, I'm not the mole for the simple reason that plumbers have nothing to do with lying, sabotage, or deception. And all of those actions are simply out of my capability. But I can assure that nobody has been completely hot on my trail. 3. If you win the game, what would you do with the money? Toadette, if I win the money, I'll help my sister go through college, and then get a higher education for myself so I could finally get a doctor's degree. Then we'll probably spend the rest of the money on renovating our house because we've always wanted a bigger home. I don't know why, we only have 3 people. But we never know who else would come. Blooper, if I win the money, well, first of all, I can't guarantee if I'll win or not. But if you want me to count my chickens before they hatch, then my choice of money spending would be on a larger boat, a new videography studio, and I want to say to help the homeless, but I'm sure that you know how that turns out in most cases. But seriously, I really will document the lives of the poor if I win this game. Luigi, if I got the money and ended up winning all of it, I'll first show Mario and he'll be astonished. Then, I can boast about it and feel good. But what I think I'll really do is help the environment of the Mushroom Kingdom. Those sewer pipes really need a makeover, and I'll definitely help with the sanitation. Don't get me at all started on Rogueport. 4. What will the mole do in this final episode? Toadette, the mole will sabotage. This is the mole's last chance to do everything, this is the last episode, their last opportunities to sabotage the game. I feel like the mole is going to be at their maximum. Blooper, I feel like the mole would try to get people onto their sides, and then sabotage the game completely. Also point lots of suspicion towards others, but mainly, sabotage a lot in this final round. Luigi, the mole will do anything this round to kill the team, well, I mean the other 2 people. But how should I know? I'm not the mole. The players were going into their next game. Ahead of them, below where they were standing, was a grand town. Houses littered every end of the path, and McAllibu looked at them, his face as ambiguous like always.
"Good morning," he said. "Welcome to the first challenge of your last episode. It's now officially the beginning of the end, so better start successful than in failure, much to the mole's opposition. Early this morning, you had written down your answers to a series of personal questions about each other. Some of them were strange, some of them embarrassing, and some of them were just downright offensive. This is the 3 questions game, and it'll test how well you know one another. One by one, you'll be sequestered in this town somewhere, hiding inside one of these houses."
McAllibu pointed at the various houses in front of them.
"For example, Blooper, you'll be going first,"
McAllibu explained.
"Luigi and Toadette, it's up to you two to find him. To find him, you must answer 3 questions correctly. You get them all right, you are led to Blooper and will win 10,000 coins for the team pot. If you get at least one of them wrong, you'll be going down the wrong path and will not find Blooper, losing the money. There'll be a total of 3 rounds, so the maximum amount of cash you can get from this challenge is 30,000 coins. Blooper, follow me."
Blooper went ahead, following the host, and led to a house somewhere in the distance. A few minutes later, McAllibu came back.
"Luigi, Toadette, follow me this way."
The 2 players stopped at the first intersection of the town trail. McAllibu suddenly turned around and took a card out from his pocket.
"Okay, this is the first question,"
read McAllibu.
"The other 2 players have been bitten by a deadly snake, and you only have antivenom for one of them. Who would you choose to give it to?"
Luigi stood where he was, flabbergasted. Toadette was uncomfortable.
"If you say Luigi, go this way,"
the host said, pointing to the left trail.
"If you think Blooper said Toadette, then go down the trail on the right."
Luigi and Toadette looked at each other.
"Well, by just looking at this question,"
Luigi said slowly,
"I think Blooper would want us to think that he'd give it to you. On the fact that you're so young, and that I would be like, oh, give it to her. I think it's just because I'm a girl,"
Toadette agreed, and the both of them laughed.
"But I also think that Blooper would give me the antivenom. I also think there might be a gender issue playing in his mind,"
thought Luigi.
"So, we're going right, because we believe Blooper would give the antivenom to Toadette. Not me, of course." "Okay, follow me,"
said McAllibu, leading them further into the town.
"And we don't even know if we got it correct,"
Toadette realized with a laugh.
"I'm sure we did,"
Luigi reassured. They walked until they reached their second fork in the road.
"Question 2,
read McAllibu.
Who would be less likely to donate money to a homeless man?"
The 2 of them thought carefully.
"I am a strong supporter of the poor people,"
Luigi declared.
"How about you?" "I'd definitely help a poor man,"
said Toadette.
"I'm not rich myself, but if I ever saw a homeless man then I would help him." "That's right,"
Luigi said suddenly.
"Remember when you helped that old guy with that card in episode 6? He wasn't poor, or anything, I mean, so let's go with me. I would be less likely to donate money to a homeless chapter." "Okay," said Toadette. "We'll go with you." "Left,"
Luigi decided. McAllibu and the 2 of them continued down. They reached a little corner, in where 2 doors were positioned. 2 houses, 2 choices.
"This is your last question,"
McAllibu told them.
"Who would have less people attend their funeral?
Luigi pondered at the question. Toadette looked uncomfortable again.
I don't want to say myself,
Toadette admitted.
But I think that'll be true,
Luigi said, then changed his mind.
Well, okay. Let's look at Blooper's point of view. Maybe he would say me. I think Blooper would say me,
Toadette said.
Why?
Luigi asked.
Because if you die, you'll be more popular and more well-known,
said Toadette.
I'll have people at my funeral, but not as many as you would have. So I'll say me. If that's your answer, please knock on the door on the right,
instructed McAliboo.
If Blooper is behind the door, it means that you answered all his questions correctly. If not, well, we have to go back, which means that you don't win 10,000 coins.
Toadette knocked on the door, and waited patiently. Nobody answered, until a drunken Bob-omb stumbled out.
Blooper Inky?
She asked.
AI, you both earn me schnitzels,
he sputtered, and then shut the door. Both players were baffled.
I'm sorry,
said McAliboo.
You did not find Blooper. Let's retrace our steps and see where he really was. Bummer,
Luigi said.
I knew we had answered something wrong.
The players followed McAliboo all the way back to their first road fork, then went the other way. After another long, monotonous travel, they reached door 28. They rang the doorbell, and Blooper came out.
I guess you didn't find me,
Blooper said in a disappointed voice. McAliboo took out the questions from his jacket.
Since Luigi and Toadette had answered at least one of your questions wrong, let's see where exactly they had messed up,
he told him.
Question 1 was, the other two players have been bitten by a deadly snake, and you only have antivenom for one of them. Who would you choose to give it to? I chose Luigi,
Blooper said.
I thought you would choose Toadette,
Luigi piped up.
It's because we all know how good of a doctor Toadette is going to become,
Blooper explained even more.
And, well, she could easily find some way to heal herself from a snake bite, without the antivenom. So I would have given it to you, Luigi.
Toadette was struck with confusion. Luigi shrugged.
For the question about the homeless man, I think Toadette would be kind enough to give him money, more likely than Luigi would,
Blooper explained ever further.
And the question about the funeral, well, I just had a feeling that Luigi would have a lot of mourners. So you got one wrong out of the 3. So because you failed to find Blooper, you do not add 10,000 coins to the pot,
said McAliboo.
But you still have the chance to add an extra 20,000 coins. Toadette, it's now your turn to be hidden.
Toadette, for Blooper to come up with the excuse that I was able to heal myself from a snake bite on my own, made no sense at all.
Question 1,
said McAliboo, reading off the question to Blooper and Luigi.
If Toadette were to choose between the two of you, who would she choose for a boyfriend?
Both players looked at each other, faces unsure, and laughed.
Awkward,
said Blooper.
So who would Toadette pick?
Wondered Luigi, in a voice that implied the answer to be Blooper.
I think she would choose you,
Blooper said truthfully.
But I already have a girlfriend,
Luigi pointed out.
I think Toadette would respect Daisy's position and choose you. So McAliboo, which person is which way again? If you think it's Blooper, go left,
said McAliboo.
If you think Toadette chose Luigi, go right. We'll go left,
Luigi said.
Toadette would never say me.
They followed the host down the trail.
Question 2,
read Macaliboo, turning around.
Who is more likely to fake their own death? For what reason?
Luigi asked with amusement.
Maybe if we wanted to get some inheritance,
Blooper thought.
Though that's the only reason I could think of. But then who's more likely to do that?
Asked Luigi.
I can't really see myself faking my own death. But I can,
said Blooper.
For some reason, I can see you faking your own death in some sort of way to gain fame. Strange, yes. But possible.
Luigi nodded.
So we're pretty much going for a guess here,
said Luigi.
Right,
Blooper confirmed.
But I'm saying that we should go by some sort of sense.
Choosing Luigi for their answer, they took the path on the right and went towards their last question.
This is your last question,
Macaliboo told them.
Toadette is on a sinking ship in the middle of a lake. Who would be more successful in saving her? If you think Luigi would, knock on the right door. If you think Blooper would, knock on the left door. I'll say myself,
Blooper said.
Do you agree? I have a gut feeling that the answer would be me,
Luigi told him.
But I'm a good swimmer and would actually be able to save her,
Blooper pointed out.
No offense, but you wouldn't be able to even reach her in time. She would drown. But we actually talked about this the day before,
argued Luigi, his eyes getting wide.
Toadette has more trust in me than you. And the whole picture of a sinking ship is irrelevant. The question is really asking us, who does she trust more? And I know that she trusts me. No, it doesn't,
Blooper argued back.
The question is asking us which person would be more likely to rescue Toadette from a sinking ship. And that's me. Well, I'm saying me,
Luigi concluded.
And you can think whatever you want, because I'm not changing my decision. I need your final answer,
Macaliboo said.
Blooper or Luigi? Luigi,
said Luigi.
Fine,
said Blooper, giving in.
Luigi.
He sighed and went over to knock the door on the right. Nobody answered for a full 30 seconds.
Knock again,
suggested Luigi. Blooper knocked again.
I'm sorry to say that she's not there,
Macaliboo told them.
You got the wrong door again. Toadette, come out.
Toadette popped out of the door. On the left. Door 27.
Hey, you guys stink at this.
Toadette said.
But close enough. Toadette, would you like to explain your answer to that last question?
Macaliboo asked.
The question, you are on a sinking ship in the middle of a lake. Who would be more successful in saving her? I thought Blooper would save me,
she explained.
Only because he's a sea explorer and is native to the water. So I thought he would be more successful in saving me than Luigi would be. To be honest, I don't even think Luigi would be able to reach the middle of the lake. That's exactly what I thought too,
Blooper muttered.
I thought that you would say me,
Luigi told her.
I guess it was my fault for thinking incorrectly. Any explanation for the first question?
Macaliboo said slyly. Toadette blushed and shook her head.
Well, because the two of you answered Luigi instead, you don't win the 10,000 coins,
Macaliboo said.
That's 2 strikes in a row. The mole is doing a good job in this challenge, and well, now, this is your last chance. Luigi, follow me. It's time for you to be sequestered in this town, away from the others.
Luigi walked away with Michaliboo, a smile on his face. Blooper turned to Toadette.
You saw that,
he said.
I know,
Toadette replied. She looked ahead at Luigi. Blooper, it seemed strange that Luigi was so convinced that the answer was him. Because of that single mistake, we lost the money. Toadette, whenever Blooper and I are alone, we gather up our suspicions for Luigi.
First question we asked Luigi,
said Michaliboo.
Who is more likely to become obese in the future? I think you would,
Blooper said.
I was thinking that Luigi would say you,
Toadette told him.
I don't think Luigi would ever see me as fat. Girls can gain so much weight after pregnancy,
Blooper pointed out.
Hence the reason why you would be more likely to become obese.
Toadette stood still.
Are you sure?
She asked.
Then that would mean I would be obese for only a few months, not for the rest of my life. Better than going with me,
said Blooper.
So I'm going with you. Is that okay? I know that in my heart I'm going to take care of my body until I die,
Toadette said in defense.
I'm never going to become obese. Look, the question asks, who's more likely,
pointed out Blooper.
Not in any way implying that either you or I will become obese. And this is just a game. Not a fortune teller predictor.
Toadette nodded reluctantly, and they traveled right.
Question 2, who is more likely to kill a puppy? Blooper,
Toadette said immediately.
Why? Because I would never harm an animal,
Toadette explained.
And you kill animals in the ocean. So the answer is not me. It's you. Okay, no objections,
said Blooper.
Luigi would have probably chosen me over anybody.
He laughed as the two of them walked further down into the town, up to their last fork.
Question 3,
Michaliboo said, stopping in front of the last pair of doors.
Who is more likely to abandon their own children when they begin a family?
Both players were equally disturbed.
I hate these questions,
Toadette said in a disgusted tone.
But we have to answer them,
Blooper said, his teeth clenched nervously.
Who would be the answer, do you think? Me,
she said immediately. Blooper was surprised.
I would say me, actually,
he said.
But it's up to you. I have no idea why you would say yourself. I don't know, I just feel that Luigi would answer that way,
Toadette explained.
It's a horrible question, but I feel that Luigi answered for me. Okay, well, I know how upset you get over these questions,
Blooper told her.
So going with me is no problem. I'll never be offended. No, let's go with me,
she insisted.
I'll say me. I have that feeling that Luigi said me, so I'm sticking with me. And Blooper?
Asked Michaliboo.
I want to answer me, just to make the situation happier,
he admitted.
But I guess I'll go with what Toadette thinks. Our answer is Toadette. So you're saying that Luigi thinks Toadette is more likely to abandon her own children when she grows up,
Michaliboo said.
Please knock on door 13. If Luigi is behind there, you win the money.
Toadette went up to door 13 and knocked on it, waiting for a reply.
Hello.
Someone replied from the other side. Luigi hopped out, and Blooper clapped.
Finally, a win,
Blooper said.
More like luck, really. I'm not amused,
Toadette said truthfully.
I can't believe you answered that last question for me. I chose randomly,
Luigi explained.
I thought it was a mean, strange question. So I just chose a random name between you two. So you know, don't get mad or anything.
Toadette didn't say anything.
It's just a game,
Luigi said reassuringly.
Yup, and we won 10,000 coins, so no complaints,
Blooper told them.
I was worried that the mole would kill this challenge completely. Since all 9 questions had been asked, that's the end of the 3 questions game,
Macalibou said.
Out of a possible 30,000 coins, you were able to achieve only a third of it.
Team Pot. 190,000 coins.
So how much was the mole in play here? Could the mole have been the cause of any of this? The 3 of you have probably asked yourselves these questions hundreds of times before, but now, you have to think even more. The reason being, we're almost at the end.
All 3 players nodded. Yes, the classic 3 questions game. We play this game all the time during our school free time, and usually quit whenever the questions get too personal. So who is actually the mole out of these determined 3 players? Well, my hint is, the mole will be at their most brutal behavior this final round. The mole will be playing very dirty. It's up to the other 2 to stop them. Please leave a review. The game is almost done after a full year. The Mole is coming back on ABC this Monday. Stay tuned. End of chapter.